The old wooden pier, weathered by a century of salt and tide, stretched into the vast, indifferent ocean. It was their place, a sanctuary where the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. Arthur, with his kind eyes and a laugh that could chase away any shadow, had pulled Clara close that evening, the sunset painting the sky in hues of impossible orange and violet. The air was cool, carrying the scent of brine and distant possibility. He had whispered a promise against her lips, a future woven from shared dreams and quiet moments. Before sealing it with a kiss that tasted of forever, a moment etched into the very fabric of Clara's soul. It was the kiss that started everything, the anchor of their love story. They built a life around such moments. Quiet mornings with steaming mugs of coffee, long walks along the beach collecting seashells, evenings spent reading side by side, the comfortable silence a testament to their profound connection. Their love wasn't a tempest, but a deep, steady river, carving its path through the landscape of their years. Arthur, a retired architect, filled their home with intricate sketches and models, each line precise, each structure a testament to his meticulous mind. Clara, a botanist, nurtured a vibrant garden, her hands always covered in earth, her spirit as resilient as the wildflowers she cultivated. The first tremor was subtle, almost imperceptible. Like a hairline crack in a masterpiece, a misplaced set of keys, a forgotten appointment, a repeated story. Harmless, they told themselves, just the natural forgetfulness of aging. But then the questions started. "Clara, where did we put the old photo album?" He'd ask, even though it sat on the coffee table he passed daily. "Did I tell you about my trip to Italy?" He'd inquire, recounting a story he'd shared just the day before. Clara, ever patient, would gently remind him, her heart a little heavier each time. She noticed the slight hesitation in his eyes, the fleeting flicker of confusion. The laughter lines around his eyes, once so endearing, now seemed to deepen with a different kind of weariness. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday, a gray rain-swept day that mirrored the sudden desolation in their hearts, early-onset Alzheimer's. The words hung in the sterile air of the doctor's office, cold and clinical, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence for the man Clara loved. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic end, but a slow, agonizing erosion, a thief stealing fragments of his mind, piece by precious piece. Clara held his hand, her knuckles white. Arthur, usually so composed, looked utterly lost, his gaze unfocused. But I remember you, Clara," he'd whispered later that night, his voice laced with a childlike fear. "I'll always remember you." She clung to those words, a desperate lifeline in the storm. The decline was relentless, a cruel, inevitable current pulling him further away. The intricate sketches became disjointed lines, the models left unfinished. His once precise mind grew foggy, then hazy, then utterly opaque. He forgot names, then faces, then the purpose of everyday objects. Clara became his anchor, his guide, his memory. She learned to speak in simpler sentences, to anticipate his confusion, to fill the silences with gentle reassurance. The hardest part wasn't just the loss of his memories, but the loss of their shared history. He forgot their first date, the day they adopted their beloved dog, the way he proposed on a windswept cliff, each forgotten. Memory was a tiny shard of glass in Clara's heart, a piece of their beautiful tapestry unraveling before her eyes. She lived in a constant state of grief, mourning the man who was slowly vanishing, even as he sat beside her. Then came the day. It was a bright, unusually warm spring afternoon. Clara had taken Arthur to the old pier, hoping the familiar salty air and the sound of the waves would stir something in him. They sat on the weathered bench, the sun warm on their faces. "Arthur," Clara began softly, her voice thick with a desperate hope, "do you remember the night you kissed me here? Right here, on this pier? You promised me forever." He turned to her, his eyes, once so full of recognition and love, now held a blank, distant gaze. He smiled, a sweet, innocent smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Did I?" he asked, his voice gentle, curious. "That sounds lovely. Who are you, dear?" The world tilted. The sun seemed to dim, the waves to roar with a sudden, deafening sound. The air left Clara's lungs, replaced by a cold, hollow ache. The kiss that started everything. The promise that tasted of forever. He had forgotten it. He had forgotten her. It wasn't just a memory lost. It was the very foundation of their love, erased. Clara felt a scream rise in her throat, but it died there, choked by the sheer weight of her despair. She looked at the man beside her, his hand resting innocently on his lap, and saw a stranger wearing Arthur's face. The man who had loved her fiercely, who had known her every secret, who had promised her eternity, was gone. And in his place was this gentle, confused soul who looked at her with polite curiosity. She took his hand, her fingers tracing the familiar lines of his palm, now softer, less calloused. He didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze back either. He just looked out at the ocean, a faint, contented smile on his lips, as if enjoying a beautiful, nameless moment. From that day forward, Clara lived in a haunting. Every photograph, every shared object, every corner of their home whispered of a past he no longer remembered. The old photo album, once a source of comfort, became a painful relic. She'd trace his younger face in the pictures, remembering the spark in his eyes, the way he'd laugh. The stories behind each snapshot. She'd look at the intricate architectural models he'd built, now gathering dust, and remember the passion that had consumed him, the brilliant mind that had designed them. The forgotten kiss became a phantom sensation on her lips, a constant, aching reminder of what had been and what was irrevocably lost. She would sometimes visit the pier alone, sitting on their bench, reliving that evening, trying to conjure the feeling of his lips on hers, the warmth of his embrace, the certainty of his promise. It was a desperate attempt to hold on to the memories for both of them, to keep them alive even if only in her own mind. There were rare, fleeting moments of agonizing clarity. Sometimes, a familiar song on the radio would make his eyes light up, a flicker of recognition passing through them. "Clara," he'd murmur, his voice suddenly strong, clear, our song. He'd hum a few bars, and for a precious few seconds, she'd see the old Arthur, the man who knew her, the man who loved her. Her heart would leap with a desperate, foolish hope, only for it to be crushed moments later as his gaze would cloud over again, the light dimming, the memory fading back into the fog. "Who's singing that?" he'd ask, his voice soft, confused. Each flicker of recognition was a double-edged sword, a brief reprieve followed by renewed grief. It was like watching someone drown slowly, occasionally surfacing for air, only to be pulled back under by an unseen current. Clara learned to live with the haunting. She learned to love the new Arthur, the gentle, childlike man who still smiled at her, who still found joy in simple things like the warmth of the sun or the taste of a sweet berry. Her love for him hadn't died. It had transformed, deepened by compassion and an enduring sense of duty. She was his caregiver, his protector, his last link to a world he could no longer grasp. She would sit with him in the garden, pointing out the wildflowers, describing their colors and scents, even if he couldn't name them. She would play their old songs on the record player, even if the melodies no longer resonated with him in the same way. She would hold his hand, her fingers intertwined with his, and tell him stories of their life together, not expecting him to remember, but needing to speak the truth of their love into the quiet air. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of impossible orange and violet, just like that night on the pier, Clara sat beside Arthur. He was quiet, his head resting against her shoulder, his breathing soft and even. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she was back on the pier, the cool air, the scent of brine, the certainty of forever. She felt the phantom pressure of his lips on hers, the echo of his whispered promise. She opened her eyes and looked at the man beside her. He was still there, physically present, his hand warm in hers. But the Arthur who had given her that kiss, the Arthur who had promised her forever, existed now only in the fragile, fiercely guarded chambers of her own memory. The weight of that forgotten kiss, a symbol of a love stolen by time and disease, was a constant, bittersweet presence, a silent testament to a love that endured, even when one half of it could no longer remember. It was a love that lived on, not in shared recollection, but in the unwavering devotion of a heart that refused to forget.